So I'm going to talk today about the Markdown plugins that Jarno has prepared for the DITA Open Toolkit. And we'll talk a little bit about why Markdown is interesting for us as DITA authors, why it's taken off as far as it has in the web community, what that means for DITA, and how we can begin using it with the toolkit. So let's dive into that first. For those of you, how many people have worked with Markdown in the past? Anyone know what that is? Okay, a few hands go up, a few hands don't. So Markdown is a plain text formatting syntax that allows you to embed a bit of formatting information in your plain text writing without using lots of angle brackets and tags and things like that. And it's become quite popular in the web community for quick and dirty authoring, allowing you to embed simple things like bold and italics and links and things like that without having to know a lot about a particular syntax. So the other idea is that it remains quite readable, so you can actually use this in email or in other contexts where the formatting syntax won't actually be resolved into something else, but still preserve the information in situations where you can actually transform it into something else. So it's a readable source format, and it makes it quite easy to write in environments where you may not have their full tool set at your disposal. But it's proving useful for more than just websites. Mobile authoring is probably one of the reasons Markdown has taken off as far as it has in recent years. So people now have these little devices in their pockets, which means that you have a computer with you essentially everywhere, and writing and capturing notes and things like that is something that can take place away from a desktop. So as people get used to the idea of being able to create content on the road, the interest in doing that in a very simple way on a very small screen has risen. And so markup formats like this, lightweight authoring formats, have really exploded with the rise of mobile devices and the web. So because authors writing in this way in plain text are encouraged to focus on structure and not so much formatting, it becomes kind of a good match for structured authoring scenarios where minimal markup is enough. And where does Markdown meet DITA? That's one area. So we talk at these conferences time and time again about how to make DITA easier. We argue about that because there are some that say, well, we shouldn't make it easier, it is hard, and if we make it easier, it won't work as well. And then there are, vendors who provide solutions that say we'll make DITA authoring like working in Word, as if that was an easy way to author things. Some people, are familiar with the tools that they know and they like to keep using those. I'm not sure that's the best way to make DITA easier, is if we suggest that it be more like Microsoft Word. But the question is, do we really need to ask subject matter experts or others that want to contribute to our publications to learn a new tool or to learn a new syntax or something like that, just so that they can deliver some content to us, maybe provide some release notes or review some of the documents that we've prepared? Is there a way that we can just write and let the tools figure out what to do? So there are several solutions that are looking into ways of doing this. One of them is the lightweight DITA idea, and another is one that George and his colleagues at Oxygen have put together, which they call DITA Glass, and that's a URL-based approach that allows you to convert various different formats to DITA on the fly in the background. And some of you that have been using the toolkit for a while may recall an older transform called H2D, which was used to convert HTML content into DITA. And this transformation is not as visible anymore as it used to be, but it still exists. And some people use that nowadays to to continue and convert HTML content to DITA. And that works, but it's kind of an extra step. So you can, the Markdown tools in the market are all capable of converting to HTML, and you can then take that HTML and use H2D to make DITA out of it. So that works, but it's kind of an extra step. And the only issue with that approach is that you're limited to the original Markdown syntax. So you can do simple things like bold and italics and links and stuff like that. But there was, of course, a lot of things that, that we would like to do to represent content in more complex ways in DITA that just can't be done with the original Markdown syntax. And so there are approaches that allow us to extend that a little bit and prepare our documents in a way that's more like what we want to do with DITA, but still adheres to the original Markdown idea of a fairly simple syntax. So let's take a look at the options we have there. And we'll talk now about the DITA-OT Markdown plugin that Jarno has produced. And this plugin extends the toolkit so you can actually use Markdown files directly in topic references without converting to HTML first and then doing something with that HTML. So you can install this plugin with the DITA command. Just run the DITA command, pass the install parameter and the URL to the plugin which lives on GitHub. And it will consume that zip file, unpack it into your toolkit directory, and you'll be able to start using the features that the plugin provides. So the most interesting thing is that you can just use a Markdown file as a topic. So we have a topic ref and an href attribute that points to our Markdown file. And the key there is we add the format attribute and set that to Markdown. So we've installed the Markdown plugin. And now to add a Markdown topic to our map, we just insert a topic ref as we would usually, and the href attribute we use to point to the Markdown file and set the format attribute to Markdown. And the plugin knows then to interpret that Markdown topic as Markdown. It knows what to do with that then. In the background, it does the conversion process and includes that in our publication like any other DITA topic. And the interesting thing about this approach is that it's not only a way of converting Markdown to DITA or reading it, but this plugin is also capable of writing Markdown. So we can take a DITA publication that we have and use the Markdown transformation type to actually output Markdown from our publication, from our map. And so that enables us to go in both directions. We can do more with this plugin than just import Markdown. So in order to do some of the things that it does, the plugin defines a new Markdown flavor called Markdown DITA, which is essentially a representation of DITA content in Markdown. And it stays true to Markdown's original idea of keeping things rather simple. It makes use of a number of extensions that have been added to Markdown over the years. So the original Markdown syntax was quite limited, but over the years people really began to appreciate this approach and tacked on a few extra things here and there. And one of the things that's used here is the reference link syntax. So there's a shortcut way of defining links in Markdown where you have essentially something that sort of looks like a footnote with a key and then the address to which that points. And that can be used for our purposes with DITA Markdown to use a simple key reference in the middle of text. So put that between square brackets and define the target for that elsewhere in your Markdown file, and that does what we do with a cross-reference and a key ref. There are things like definition lists that were not included in the original Markdown syntax, but that have been added by others, also for HTML. And Jarno's decided to make use of this to map some of these features to things that we do in DITA. So one of those is the definition list format, where you just take a term, put it on a line below, start it with a colon, becomes the definition, and that then is transformed into our familiar DITA markup with a definition list and a definition list entry, term, definition, etc. So some of those things are Markdown extensions that are provided also within the HTML world for other things. And there are things like tables that can also be done that way. There's a Markdown flavor called multi-Markdown that allows the creation of much more complex tables. And a tool called Pandoc, which is used to convert back and forth between Markdown and a number of other simplified markup formats, introduces the concept of header attributes that can be used to associate metadata with Markdown files. And Jarno has decided to make use of this to do some things that we might be interested in doing for our DITA documents. So adding in perhaps an ID or an output class to our topic titles. And you can use the same approach to also tag your Markdown files with the information type that you'd like to generate. So if you want your Markdown topic to come out as a concept or as a reference topic or as a task, you can add that information to a header attribute that will then signal to the plugin that it should transform that into the particular information type. And the same approach is used to generate sections and example elements. So you use those header attributes to do that. And Jarno has provided a syntax reference for the plugin that explains all of the various syntax extensions that are supported. So there's a document there that will show you what you need to author in Markdown to make it work with the plugin. And so why would we want to do this? One of the reasons is that this plugin, in contrast with some of the other approaches for converting Markdown, really makes it a first-class citizen. You don't need to view Markdown as raw material that you convert once and then abandon. You can actually maintain content in Markdown and leave it there and reference those Markdown files in your maps and continue using them in that original format. And the Toolkit plugin will take care of converting that as necessary. So the use case for that is interesting in the sense that you can circulate these documents to a range of authors that have no idea about DITA. And that may be people in your organization that help you to prepare release notes or something like that. They can just submit a very simple plain text format to you, and you can use that and link it directly in your documents. You can use that as an approach for review, whereby you can generate Markdown from your DITA publication, send that to people, they can mark it up and send it back to you. So in workflows that involve circulating things back and forth between authors who either don't have access to XML authoring tools or who find the markup of XML too complex, that makes a good way to be able to share things with those people. So it really lowers the barrier to entry. We can solicit contributions from many more people within the organization. The review process with less technical people becomes much easier. And one thing that makes this also interesting is the fact that there are a number of publication processes out there, publishing systems, that have been developed around the Markdown format. And by using Markdown via these plugins, we gain access to those publishing systems. So things like GitHub, where projects have a wiki that essentially has a Markdown format and a source format, we can publish our DITA documents to a GitHub wiki and put them up there for everyone to see. That makes that very easy. The wiki system there uses something in the background called Jekyll, which is a static website publishing tool originally done in Ruby. And that's used nowadays also to publish many large websites. So their source files are stored in Markdown, and that is then rendered by this Jekyll tool to HTML. And so we can do the same with our DITA publications. We can use in the background all of the complexities that we have in our DITA files, export Markdown, and then publish that via Jekyll to a website. So we gain access to a bunch of publishing tools that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. We would need to develop our own transforms or customize things in the toolkit, and this makes that a little bit easier. So there's a few things to consider with a Markdown-based workflow, and that is that while this plugin is capable of both reading and writing Markdown, it's probably not a good idea to try to round trip with this constantly. So you can go in both directions, but it's not really intended to be a round-tripping mechanism where it goes back and forth all the time. So there are a couple of ways to deal with that. One is to view Markdown as a raw input format that allows people to give you things, and then you enrich that after it's been converted to DITA. So add whatever additional syntax you need, maybe some conditional processing, con-key refs, other more complex types of semantics that we grow attached to in the DITA world. But that's one use case where you take that content and then leave it in DITA once it's there. Another one is the idea that if there are topics that undergo heavier revision cycles and more frequently reviewed, more frequently revised, can you structure your publication in a way that allows you to leave those topics in Markdown so that they can go back and forth with people without any loss involved? And that type of content that you're authoring collaboratively like that, you leave in Markdown and then just extend with some of the Markdown DITA conventions that are there to increase the fidelity with the rest of your DITA publication, but then just publish it alongside your more complex topics that are maintained in DITA. So those are a few ways of going about it. I'm sure Jarno will be welcome to answer a few more questions on that if you have any more ideas or questions about implementation details or how to use it. That's it. I'm over my time. So just a few links there. At the end, the original Daring Fireball website has the explanation of the Markdown project and the syntax description for the original Markdown. The second link is the link to the plugin itself. And there is a syntax reference there that Jarno has added. And the third link is a blog post that I put together 6 months ago or so that describes this in a little bit more detail in prose. So follow those links. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties there.
Okay, so any quick questions?
Thanks. I can see that this is attractive for developers who work in Markdown anyway.
Yes.
But for people coming from Word or the non-techies,
right.
We've been trying to offer them something for lightweight contributions, and they complain about XML editing kind of behavior. But do you really think this is going to make it easier or more attractive for those people? Do you have any experience with that?
It really depends. I think that the type of markup that people need on an everyday basis is so simple. Most people just need to make something bold, make something italic, add a link. Most people can learn that quite quickly. And depending upon who we're talking to, many people for years have been using this syntax already in emails and just don't think about it. So there are email clients that if you have a word that begins with an asterisk and ends with an asterisk, we'll mark that in bold and things like that. So it is, yes, it is something perhaps for more technical people. It's probably something that has gained more traction in technical audiences who are looking for something simple and not for completely non-technical people. Because yes, you have to tell them that if you want a link to appear, you need to wrap your word in square brackets and put the URL in parentheses. Yes, but in the grand scheme of what is complex and what is simple, that is one way of embedding simple markup. And you're right, there are people for whom that is too complex as well.
Especially if they only occasionally look at this and contribute. Remembering those things, yes, there may be only a few simple rules, but even those we forget after a month.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that this is a good point, but there are audiences that work in Markdown all day, every day, and think in Markdown. Developers, not all of them, but many do that. Many use Markdown formatting in their code comments because those code comments have been parsed to something else. And then when I worked on the project at Nokia a couple years ago, their developers were offering all of their documentation to Markdown anyway. And they just didn't want to be bothered with DITA, and it was my job to get that information into DITA publications. And so what I did at the time was the state of the art at the time. I transferred that via the HTTP into HTML, and then via HTTP from HTML to DITA. And the developers were happy because they could continue offering the documentation in Markdown and it made it into DITA publication. So it is maybe a niche solution, but it makes a niche really